The aliens craved war, until humans brutally paraded their king in public. Part 2. The Valkyrie Armada arrived on the 9th day, a full rotation ahead of their own deadline. Drothal had not waited for the humans to respond. He did not care what they had to say. In his experience, prey always tried to talk before it died. Begging, bargaining, pleading. He had heard it all before from a dozen different species, and none of it had ever changed the outcome. 300 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel, just beyond the orbit of Mars. They arranged themselves in the traditional Valkyrie conquest formation, a wide crescent designed to sweep inward and crush whatever lay at its center. Every ship in the formation knew its role. The heavy cruisers formed the backbone. The destroyers filled the gaps. The fighter carriers hung behind the line, ready to unleash swarms of attack craft at a moment's notice. At the very center of the crescent, massive and bristling with weapons, sat the Throne of Ashes, the flagship of King Drothal himself. On the command deck, Drothal stood before a wall of tactical displays and studied the human solar system. Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and there, small and blue and fragile, was Earth. He could see the faint traces of human ships moving near their homeworld, a handful of vessels that looked like toys compared to his warships. He turned to General Vakar. "Is that all they have?" he asked. Vakar checked his sensors again. The readings showed fewer than 50 human vessels, scattered in loose clusters near Earth and its moon. No organized formation, no defensive line. It looked like the humans had barely managed to scrape together a response at all. "That appears to be everything," Vakar said. "They did not even try to meet us at the outer planets." Drothal grunted with satisfaction. "All ships forward. Full attack speed." The crescent surged forward. 300 warships accelerated toward Earth in perfect formation, their engines burning hot against the black of space. On the Throne of Ashes, Drothal's elite guard stood at attention, already preparing for the ground invasion that would follow the destruction of the human fleet. Admiral Laura Beckett watched them come. She was standing in a command center buried deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, surrounded by screens that showed her everything happening in the solar system. She could see the Valkyrie crescent moving inward, fast and confident. She could see the trajectory, the speed, the formation, and she smiled, because the Valkyrie were doing exactly what she had expected them to do. Beckett had not placed Earth's fleet in a defensive line, because a defensive line would have been destroyed in minutes. Instead, she had broken her forces into small, dispersed clusters. Some were tucked behind the moon. Some were drifting among orbital debris fields, with their engines cold and their systems powered down. Some were sitting inside decommissioned satellite networks, invisible to anything but the most careful scan. To Valkyrie sensors, it looked like Earth had almost no defense at all. That was the point. "Let them get comfortable," Beckett said to her staff. "Let them think this is going to be easy." The first strike came from behind the moon. Commander Kyle Preston, a 34-year-old pilot with steady hands and a reputation for doing things nobody else would try, led a squadron of 12 fast-attack corvettes out of the lunar shadow at full speed. His ships were small, barely armored, and would not survive a direct hit from a Valkyrie cruiser. But they were fast, and they carried something the Valkyrie had never seen before. "Launch drones," Kyle ordered. Every corvette opened its bays. Thousands of autonomous combat drones poured out into space like a swarm of angry insects. Each drone was tiny, no bigger than a human fist, armed with a single-shaped charge designed to punch through armor plating. Individually, they were nothing. Together, they were a nightmare. The drones hit the Valkyrie right flank like a wave. The alien warships tried to shoot them down, but there were too many. Point defense cannons that were designed to track and destroy enemy missiles could not keep up with thousands of tiny, erratically moving targets. The drones latched onto hull plating, engine housings, sensor arrays, and weapon mounts, and detonated. 14 Valkyrie warships were crippled in the first 20 minutes. 3 of them broke apart entirely, their hulls torn open by hundreds of small explosions that added up to something devastating. On the throne of ashes, alarms screamed. Drothal watched his tactical display with narrowed eyes as ship after ship on his right flank reported critical damage. This was not how conquered species were supposed to fight. They were supposed to form a line and die with dignity, not attack from the shadows with swarms of tiny machines. "Tighten the formation," he ordered. "Focus all fire on those small ships. Destroy them." The Valkyrie adapted fast. They had fought many wars, and they knew how to respond to surprises. The Crescent pulled inward, concentrating its firepower. Heavy cruisers turned their broadsides on Kyle's corvettes, and the result was brutal. Valkyrie plasma cannons hit with the force of small nuclear explosions. Kyle's squadron, exposed and outgunned, began to die. The corvette Reckless was hit first, cut in half by a single shot. Then the Blackbird, then the Fang. Kyle watched his squadron shrink on his display and gave the order to retreat. They had done their job. Now it was time to run. On board the carrier vessel Steadfast, which had been hanging back to recover damaged drones, a medic named Carla Jennings was pulling wounded crew members out of burning compartments. She was covered in blood that was not her own, working with hands that would not stop shaking, but she kept moving. She dragged an unconscious engineer out of a flooded corridor. She sealed a wound on a pilot's chest with nothing but a patch kit and willpower. She saved 11 lives in 40 minutes before a hull breach forced her own evacuation. She climbed into an escape pod, slammed the hatch, and launched into space with 3 other survivors, watching the Steadfast burn behind her. Kyle's retreat left the Valkyrie feeling confident. They had taken losses, yes, but they had driven off the human attack and destroyed several enemy ships. Vakar reported to Drothal that the human fleet was broken and scattering. Victory was not finished. She had used Kyle's attack to achieve 2 things. First, she had bloodied the Valkyrie and proven that they could be hurt. Second, and more importantly, she had forced them to commit to a specific heading. The Crescent was now moving on a fixed path toward Earth, and Beckett knew exactly where they would be in 30 minutes. She sent a single coded transmission, 1 short burst, aimed at the asteroid belt. Captain Tony Ruiz had been waiting for that signal for 6 days. His fleet of 60 warships had been hiding among the asteroids in complete communication silence. No transmissions in or out, no active sensors, nothing but cold metal drifting in the dark. His crews were exhausted, anxious, and half crazy from the silence. His first officer, Lieutenant Hannah Briggs, had kept them together through sheer force of personality, running drills and keeping discipline even when some of the younger officers were ready to break. When Beckett's signal came through, Tony felt a wave of relief wash over him. He turned to Hannah and said, "Light 'em up." Hannah hit the fleet-wide alert. 60 warships powered up simultaneously, engines flaring to life in the darkness of the asteroid belt. They came screaming out of the rocks at full combat speed, aimed directly at the rear of the Valkyrie formation. The Valkyrie did not see them coming until it was too late. The Crescent formation, designed to encircle a static enemy, had left the rear almost completely exposed. Tony's fleet hit them like a hammer striking glass. The battle became chaos. Caught between Kyle's surviving corvettes on one side and Tony's fresh fleet on the other, the Valkyrie formation broke. Friendly fire ripped through confused squadrons. The discipline that had carried the Valkyrie across 47 star systems crumbled in the face of an enemy that did not fight the way it was supposed to fight. 46 Valkyrie warships were destroyed outright. Dozens more were left drifting, dark and dead, their crews killed or trapped. the space around Mars became a graveyard of twisted metal and frozen debris. And then, something happened that had never happened before in the entire history of the Valkyrie Empire. King Drothal, the Unbroken, gave the order to retreat. The surviving Valkyrie ships pulled back to the far side of Mars, battered and bleeding. On the command deck of the Throne of Ashes, the air smelled like smoke and fear. Vakar knelt before his king and said the words no Valkyrie general had ever spoken to Drothal's face. "They are more dangerous than we thought." Drothal struck him across the jaw, hard enough to crack bone. Vakar did not flinch. He stayed on his knees, blood dripping from his mouth, and waited. Drothal stared at the tactical display. Half his fleet was gone. The humans, who were supposed to fold in hours, had fought like something out of a nightmare. He could feel the eyes of his crew on him. He could feel the doubt spreading through his ship like poison. "Danger," Drothal said slowly, "is what the Valkyrie were made for. Call the colony worlds. Tell them to send every ship they have." He sat back on his throne and gripped the armrests until the metal groaned. The war was not over. It was just beginning. And far away, in a command center beneath the mountains, Admiral Laura Beckett was already planning the next move. The aliens craved war, until humans brutally paraded their king in public. Part 3. 3 weeks passed after the first battle. The Valkyrie fleet sat behind Mars, licking its wounds and waiting for reinforcements. Drothal had sent the call to his nearest colony world, and 100 fresh warships were on their way. He expected the humans to use this time to hide behind their planet and pray. He was wrong. Admiral Beckett had studied enough history to know that waiting was a death sentence. An enemy that was allowed to rest and rebuild would come back stronger. She had no intention of giving Drothal that chance. Instead, she launched a campaign that would have been familiar to any student of human warfare. It was not a grand battle. It was something worse. It was harassment, constant, unpredictable, and maddening. She broke her forces into dozens of small strike teams. Each team operated independently under broad mission orders. Hit anything that moves. Do not follow a pattern. Do not stay in one place long enough to be caught. Make them afraid to sleep. The Valkyrie had never faced anything like it. They were used to enemies who formed lines and fought in the open. They understood courage and they understood surrender. What they did not understand was an enemy that appeared out of nowhere, struck hard, vanished into the dark, and then struck again from a completely different direction 2 hours later. Kevin Marsh made it all possible. The quiet intelligence analyst from Virginia had been working around the clock since the first battle, and he had cracked enough of the Valkyrie communications protocol to give Earth's forces something priceless. He could not read every message the Valkyrie sent, but he could identify which signals were routine and which were urgent. He could track the movement of Valkyrie patrols by following their communication patterns. He could tell when a ship was calling for help, and when a ship was reporting that all was clear. Working from a cramped room with a team of 4 analysts, Kevin became the invisible hand guiding Earth's raids. He told the strike teams where the gaps in Valkyrie patrols were. He told them which ships were isolated and vulnerable. He told them when Valkyrie sensors were active and when they were not. The strike teams moved through the Valkyrie perimeter like ghosts, and the Valkyrie could not figure out how. One of the most successful raids was led by Sergeant Paula Vance. Paula was 31 years old, built like a welterweight fighter, and absolutely fearless. She had joined the Marines at 18 and spent the next 13 years volunteering for every dangerous assignment she could find. When the war started, she had been the first person to raise her hand for what the other soldiers called the crazy missions. The ones where you boarded enemy ships and fought the Valkyrie face to face. Paula's target was a damaged Valkyrie destroyer that was being towed back to the main fleet for repairs. Kevin had identified it as isolated, with minimal escort. Paula took a team of 8 Marines in a stealth shuttle, matched speed with the crippled destroyer, and cut their way through the hull. The fighting inside was close and brutal. Valkyrie warriors were bigger, stronger, and covered in natural armor plating that could stop a standard bullet. But Paula's team did not use standard bullets. They used armor-piercing rounds, explosive breaching charges, and a level of close-quarters aggression that stunned the Valkyrie defenders. Humans, it turned out, were terrifyingly effective in tight spaces. They were smaller and faster, and they had a natural ability to coordinate with each other through hand signals, eye contact, and instincts that had been sharpened by thousands of years of hunting and fighting in groups. Paula's team cleared the destroyer in under 30 minutes. They planted charges throughout the ship, stole a Valkyrie navigation computer from the bridge, and escaped in a stolen shuttle. Behind them, the destroyer exploded in a ball of white fire. The navigation computer was a treasure beyond anything they had hoped for. Kevin and his team spent 3 days pulling it apart, and what they found changed the course of the war. The computer contained detailed star maps of the Valkyrie supply chain, including the location of a massive forward supply depot hidden in the rings of Saturn. The depot was where the Valkyrie fleet was getting its fuel, ammunition, food, and spare parts. Without it, the fleet would starve. Admiral Beckett authorized the attack immediately. Captain Tony Ruiz led the assault with the bulk of Earth's remaining heavy warships. The battle at Saturn's rings was the largest engagement since the opening fight, and it was completely one-sided. The supply depot was defended by a garrison of 20 ships that had not expected to be found, let alone attacked. Tony's fleet overwhelmed them in less than an hour. The depot was destroyed, along with enough supplies to keep the Valkyrie fleet running for months. The effect on the Valkyrie was devastating. Without the depot, Drothal was forced to ration everything: energy, ammunition, food, even breathable air on some of the older ships. Crews that had been confident and eager for battle began to grow hungry, tired, and afraid. Fights broke out between Valkyrie warriors over ration packs. Officers who questioned the war were beaten or killed by their superiors. The discipline that had held the Valkyrie military together for centuries was cracking. Commander Nora Whitfield saw the cracks and knew exactly how to make them wider. Working alongside Kevin, she had built a detailed picture of the Valkyrie command structure. What she found was both a strength and a fatal weakness. Everything in the Valkyrie Empire flowed through King Drothal. Every major decision, every strategic order, every response to a crisis required his personal approval. The warlords beneath him had been trained to obey, not to think. If Drothal gave an order, the fleet moved instantly and without question. But if Drothal hesitated, the entire fleet hesitated with him. And if Drothal was removed from the picture entirely, there was no one to take his place. The warlords would turn on each other within hours. Nora laid her analysis out for Admiral Beckett in a secure briefing room deep underground. Kevin was there too, along with Tony Ruiz and Paula Vance, who had been called back from the front for this meeting. "If we kill Drothal, his fleet falls apart," Nora said. "But killing him makes him a martyr. The colony worlds will rally around his memory and come for revenge." She paused and looked around the room. "But if we capture him alive," she continued, "we do not just remove their leader. We humiliate him. We break the myth. The Valkyrie worship strength, and there is nothing weaker than a king in chains. His own people will abandon him." The room was quiet for a long time. Beckett stared at the table, thinking. Everyone knew what Nora was suggesting. It was not just a military operation. It was a message to the entire galaxy. Finally, Beckett looked up. Her eyes were hard and steady. "How do we get to him?" she asked. Paula Vance leaned forward. "You let me worry about that." Beckett studied the sergeant for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Do it," she said. "Bring me their king." The planning for what would become Operation Long Reach began that night. It would be the most dangerous mission of the war. It would require perfect timing, incredible bravery, and a level of coordination that most military planners would have called impossible. But then again, that was what the Valkyrie had said about the humans from the very beginning. And the humans have been proving them wrong ever since. The aliens craved war until humans brutally paraded their king in public. Part 4. Operation Long Reach was built on a simple idea that was almost impossible to execute. While every human warship attacked the Valkyrie fleet head-on, a small team would slip through the chaos, board the Throne of Ashes, and capture King Drothal alive. Sergeant Paula Vance was given command of the boarding team. She handpicked 12 soldiers, every one of them a volunteer, every one of them someone she had fought beside before. She did not want heroes. She wanted people she trusted, people who could stay calm when everything was burning around them, people who would follow orders and protect each other no matter what happened. They trained for 9 days. Kevin Marsh provided them with everything he had learned about the interior layout of the Throne of Ashes, pieced together from intercepted communications, stolen data, and careful analysis. Nora Whitfield ran them through scenario after scenario, drilling the team on Valkyrie combat tactics, guard rotation patterns, and the layout of the command deck. Paula ran them through close-quarters combat exercises until they could move through a ship corridor blindfolded. On the 10th day, Admiral Beckett gave the order. Everything Earth had left was going into this single throw of the dice. The fleet assault was the largest military operation in human history. Nearly 200 warships moved out from Earth in a coordinated wave, aimed directly at the Valkyrie position behind Mars. Captain Tony Ruiz commanded the main battle group from his flagship, the Resolute. Lieutenant Hannah Briggs coordinated the drone swarms from a command ship in the second line. Commander Kyle Preston, who had recovered from injuries sustained in the first battle and refused to stay in a hospital bed any longer, led a fast attack force on the left flank. His job was simple and suicidal. Draw as much Valkyrie fire as possible and keep their attention focused away from the flagship. The Valkyrie saw them coming. Drothal had been expecting another attack, though not one this large. He arranged his surviving fleet, still over 150 warships strong, into a defensive crescent, and waited. When the human fleet came into range, he gave the order to fire. The battle began with a wall of plasma that lit up the space between the two fleets like a sun being born. Human ships died in the opening seconds. The destroyer Cape and the frigate Northwind were cut apart before they could even return fire. But the human fleet did not slow down. They kept coming, pouring fire into the Valkyrie line, absorbing punishment that would have broken any other species. Kyle Preston hit the Valkyrie left flank with everything he had. His fast attack ships screamed in at maximum speed, launching drones and missiles and firing every weapon they carried. The Valkyrie turned their guns on him, exactly as planned, and Kyle danced through a storm of plasma fire that killed ships on either side of him. He lost a third of his force in the first 10 minutes, and did not flinch. Tony Ruiz drove the main fleet into the center of the Valkyrie line like a fist. The fighting became close range, ship to ship, almost hull to hull. At these distances, the Valkyrie advantage in firepower mattered less. Human ships were smaller and more agile, and they exploited every gap in the Valkyrie formation. Hannah Briggs poured drone swarms into the confused melee, clogging Valkyrie sensors and creating blind spots in their targeting systems. The battle was enormous and terrible. Ships on both sides burned. The void between Mars and Earth filled with wreckage, debris, and the frozen bodies of the dead. Neither fleet broke, and in the middle of all that chaos, a single captured Valkyrie shuttle slipped through the battle unnoticed. Paula Vance sat in the pilot's seat, her knuckles white on the controls. Beside her, her 12 soldiers sat in silence, their weapons checked and their faces calm. The shuttle was broadcasting a Valkyrie transponder code that Kevin had pulled from the stolen navigation computer. To the Valkyrie sensor operators, overwhelmed by the battle raging around them, the shuttle looked like one of their own damaged craft, limping home. Kevin Marsh was feeding them real-time updates from his signals room on Earth. He was tracking every Valkyrie communication, every sensor sweep, every gap in the flagship's coverage. His voice in Paula's earpiece was steady and quiet, guiding her through the chaos like a lighthouse beam cutting through fog. "Turn 30 degrees port," Kevin said. "There is a sensor gap opening in 12 seconds. You will have a 40-second window to reach the hull." Paula adjusted course. The throne of ashes filled the shuttle's viewport, massive and dark, its hull scarred by old battles and decorated with the welded-on wreckage of conquered ships. It was the ugliest thing Paula had ever seen, and it was exactly where she needed to be. The shuttle latched onto the flagship's lower hull, near a maintenance hatch. Paula's team moved fast. They cut through the hatch in seconds, and dropped into a service corridor that smelled like oil and hot metal. The interior of the Throne of Ashes was enormous, a dark labyrinth of corridors and chambers, built for creatures much larger than humans. War trophies lined the walls. The bones and skulls of defeated enemies were mounted in display cases. The air was thick and heavy, warmer than Earth standard, and carried a smell that the team would later describe as something between copper and rotting meat. Valkyrie warriors patrolled every major corridor. They were huge, armored, and armed with weapons that could cut a human in half. But Paula had planned for this. Her team moved through service tunnels and maintenance shafts, avoiding the main corridors entirely. When they could not avoid contact, they struck fast and silent, using suppressed weapons and blades that made almost no sound. They reached the command deck in 43 minutes. 3 of Paula's 12 soldiers had been killed along the way, lost in short, vicious fights in dark corridors. She did not have time to grieve. She could grieve later, if she survived. The command deck was behind a reinforced blast door. Paula's demolition specialist, a quiet man named Greg Hale, placed shaped charges on the hinges and the lock. The team stacked up on either side of the door, weapons ready. "Blow it," Paula said. The door came off its frame in a shower of sparks and broken metal. The team poured through the gap into the throne room of King Drathal. The room was enormous. It was more like a cathedral than a command center, with high ceilings lost in shadow and pillars made from the fused hulls of destroyed warships. At the far end, on a throne of blackened metal, sat Drathal, and standing between him and the humans were 20 of his elite guard, the most dangerous warriors in the Valkyrie Empire. Each one was over 7 feet tall, encased in powered armor, and carrying weapons designed for killing. The fight lasted less than 3 minutes, and it was the most violent 3 minutes of the entire war. 2 of Paula's team died in the first exchange of fire, but the humans fought with a ferocity that stunned the Valkyrie guard. In the tight confines of the throne room, human speed and coordination counted for more than Valkyrie size and strength. The soldiers moved in pairs, covering each other, flanking the guards, drawing them into crossfires. One by one, the elite guard fell. Drathal did not wait on his throne. He rose and fought. He was bigger than any of his guards, nearly 8 feet tall, and he moved with a speed that seemed impossible for something so large. He grabbed Corporal Ethan Moore and broke him with a single blow that caved in his chest armor. He threw another soldier across the room like a doll. Paula watched Ethan fall, and something cold and hard settled in her chest. She pulled the neural disruptor from her belt, a weapon designed to overload an alien nervous system, and charged straight at the king. Drathal swung at her. She ducked under his arm, feeling the wind of the blow pass over her head, and pressed the disruptor against his throat. She pulled the trigger. Drathal's body locked up. His eyes went wide. For one terrible second, He stood frozen, every muscle rigid, and then he crashed to the deck like a falling building. The throne room shook with the impact. His bone trophies scattered across the floor, rattling and rolling in the sudden silence. Paula stood over the fallen king, breathing hard, her hands shaking. She pulled reinforced restraints from her pack and locked them around his wrists and ankles. Then she keyed her communicator and sent 2 words to Admiral Beckett. Crown taken. The message traveled from the throne of ashes to the command center beneath the Rocky Mountains in a fraction of a second. Beckett received it, closed her eyes for just a moment, and then gave the order to broadcast on all Valkyrie frequencies. Your king has fallen. He is in human custody. Your war is over. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Exactly as Nora Whitfield had predicted, the Valkyrie chain of command disintegrated. Without Drothal, the warlords had no authority, no hierarchy, and no reason to cooperate. Some surrendered on the spot. Some turned their guns on rival warlords. Some fled into deep space. Some fought to the death because they did not know how to do anything else. Within 6 hours, the Valkyrie Armada ceased to exist as a fighting force. The debris field around Mars stretched for thousands of miles. The war, for all practical purposes, was over. Paula Vance carried the unconscious body of King Drothal to the captured shuttle with what remained of her team. 7 soldiers had gone in, 4 walked out. They laid the king on the deck between them and flew back to Earth in silence. Nobody celebrated. Not yet. There was still one thing left to do. The aliens craved war, until humans brutally paraded their king in public. Part 5. The war was over, but the message had not been sent yet. Admiral Laura Beckett understood something that most military leaders throughout galactic history had failed to grasp. Winning a battle was not the same as winning a peace. The Valkyrie colony worlds were still out there. 100 reinforcement ships were still in transit. And beyond the Valkyrie, dozens of other spacefaring civilizations had been watching the war unfold with great interest. Some of them had already been making plans to test humanity for themselves. Beckett needed to do more than defeat the Valkyrie. She needed to make sure that no one anywhere ever made the same mistake again. The Global Defense Accord authorized her plan within hours. There was almost no debate. The leaders of Earth's nations had watched their sons and daughters die in the void above their heads. They wanted the galaxy to remember what that sacrifice had bought. They called it the Parade. King Drothal was brought to Earth aboard a military transport under heavy guard. He had regained consciousness during the flight, and the soldiers watching over him said he had not spoken a single word. He sat in his cell with his predator's eyes open, staring at the wall, breathing slow and deep. Some of the guards found him terrifying, even in chains. Others found him pathetic. Most found him both. They stripped him of everything. His bone trophies, the jawbones and finger bones and skull fragments of kings he had killed, were removed and catalogued. His ceremonial armor, black and heavy, covered in the carved symbols of every civilization he had destroyed, was taken apart, piece by piece. Every symbol of his authority, his rank insignia, his crown of fused metal, his war cloak made from the hides of alien beasts, all of it was taken from him. In its place, they gave him a plain gray suit of the kind used for prisoner transport. Simple fabric, no decoration, no mark of status. They put metal cuffs on his wrists, not because they needed to restrain him at that point, but because they wanted the galaxy to see them. The date was set. The location was Washington, D.C. The broadcast would go out live on every channel on Earth and be transmitted simultaneously on every frequency the human communications network could reach. The signal would propagate outward at the speed of light, and within hours, the galactic community would receive it. The morning of the parade was cold and clear. The streets of Washington had been closed since dawn, and by the time the sun was fully up, millions of people had gathered along the route. They stood on sidewalks and rooftops and bridges. They pressed against barricades and climbed lampposts for a better view. They came from every nation, every background, every walk of life. Some had lost family in the war. Some had served. All of them had watched the sky for weeks and wondered if they would survive. A military vehicle brought Drothal to the starting point. When the doors opened and he stepped out into the sunlight, a ripple went through the crowd. He was enormous, nearly 8 feet tall, with dense gray skin and a body that looked like it had been built for war and nothing else. His shoulders were wider than a doorframe. His hands, even in cuffs, looked like they could crush stone. He had to duck to clear the vehicle's roof. And yet he was wearing plain gray cloth and walking in chains. 2 rows of human soldiers lined the route, standing at attention. None of them reached his shoulder. Beckett wanted the galaxy to see a king of conquerors, the most feared warrior in known space, being walked like a prisoner between soldiers half his size. She wanted them to understand what that meant. Drothal walked. His steps were slow and heavy. His eyes moved across the crowd, and the soldiers who watched him later said they could see him searching for something. He was looking for fear. He was looking for submission, for the kind of trembling worship he had seen on every world he had ever conquered. On those worlds, the people had screamed. They had fallen to their knees. They had begged. The humans did none of those things. The crowd was silent. Millions of people stood in absolute deliberate silence. No cheering, no jeering, no chanting, no insults, just a wall of quiet, steady human faces, looking at him without flinching. The silence was heavier than any sound could have been. It said, very clearly, that these people were not impressed. Drothal's stride faltered for just a moment. It was small enough that most people would not have noticed, but the cameras caught it, and the galaxy would study that single stumble for generations. Something had cracked behind those predators' eyes. For the first time in his life, Drothal was standing in front of a species that did not fear him, did not worship him, and did not care how many worlds he had burned. They looked at him the way a person looks at a storm that has already passed. The route ended at the steps of the Capitol building. Admiral Beckett stood waiting at the top, in full dress uniform, her gray hair pulled back, and her face showing nothing. Beside her stood the people who had made this moment possible. Kevin Marsh, the quiet analyst who had cracked the Valkyrie codes and guided the war from a basement room. Nora Whitfield, the intelligence commander who had found the key to breaking the Valkyrie Empire. Tony Ruiz, the captain who had led fleets into battles that should have been impossible to win. Paula Vance, the sergeant who had walked into the throne room of a king and brought him down with her own hands. Hannah Briggs, who had kept exhausted crews fighting when they wanted to quit. Carl Preston, who had flown into walls of plasma fire and somehow come out alive. Carla Jennings, who had saved lives in burning ships while the void tried to swallow her. They stood together, officers and enlisted, strategists and fighters, men and women, none of them remarkable to look at. None of them 8 feet tall. None of them covered in armor or decorated with the bones of the fallen. They were just humans. Behind them hung the flags of every nation on earth, side by side, moving gently in the morning wind. The broadcast was going out to the entire planet and beyond. She spoke simply and clearly, because that was who she was. "We did not ask for this war," she said. "We did not seek it. We did not want it. A fleet came to our door and told us to kneel, and we chose to stand. The cost of that choice was paid in lives, in grief, in the blood of people who deserved to grow old, in a world they helped save." She paused. The silence in the street was absolute. Let this be a message to anyone in the galaxy who is watching. We are not conquerors. We do not burn worlds. We do not collect the bones of the fallen. But if you come for us, If you threaten our home, if you try to take from us what is ours, you will find us waiting, and we will not kneel." She turned to face Drothal, who had been brought to stand at the base of the steps. He looked up at her, and for a moment the galaxy held its breath. "You came here looking for a war," Beckett said, and her voice carried across the silent street and out into the stars. "You found one. Take a good look at the people who ended yours." Drothal said nothing. He stared at her, and then he stared at the people behind her, and then he looked out at the millions of silent faces lining the streets, and something in him seemed to collapse. Not his body was still strong, but something behind his eyes went dark, like a fire being smothered. The unbroken, for the first time in his life, had been broken. He was led away to a secure detention facility. He never spoke publicly again. The aftermath unfolded faster than anyone had expected. The Valkyrie reinforcement fleet, 100 warships strong, received the broadcast while still in transit. They stopped. They held position for 2 days while their commanders argued. Then they turned around and went home. Valkyrie colony worlds sent envoys to Earth within weeks, not to threaten, but to negotiate. Without their king, without their fleet, and without the myth of Valkyrie invincibility, they had nothing left to fight with. The terms Earth offered were firm but fair. No conquest, no revenge. Disarmament and accountability for war crimes, but also the chance to rebuild. 3 other civilizations that had been quietly planning incursions into human space abandoned their plans entirely. Intelligence later revealed that 2 of them had already assembled invasion fleets. Those fleets were disbanded within days of the parade broadcast reaching their homeworlds. 2 of the 3 sent diplomatic missions to Earth instead. One of them, a species called the Rathani, sent a single message that read, "We would like to be your friends, please." The heroes of the war went their separate ways, but they carried the war with them in ways that never fully healed. Kevin Marsh was promoted and given command of a new interstellar intelligence division. He accepted the job, but told Nora Whitfield privately that he missed his small room with the 4 analysts and the blinking screens. Nora herself became Earth's first ambassador to the galactic community, a role that suited her calm mind and sharp instincts better than any military post ever had. Tony Ruiz took command of the newly formed Expeditionary Fleet. His job was not conquest, but exploration and deterrence, making sure that every species with a telescope knew that humanity could project force far beyond its own solar system. Hannah Briggs designed the fleet's operational doctrine, and Kyle Preston tested the new warships she helped build, pushing them to their limits the way he pushed everything. Paula Vance was offered a promotion to officer rank. She turned it down. "I prefer to stay where the action is," she said, and went back to training the next generation of Marines. She never talked about the throne room unless someone asked, and even then she kept it short. She would say that she did her job and that the people who did not come back deserved the credit. Carla Jennings left the military and went back to medicine. She helped establish the first interspecies medical exchange program, working with alien doctors to share knowledge that would save lives on 100 worlds. She still had nightmares about the Steadfast, about burning corridors and hull breaches and the sound of metal screaming. But she found that helping people, any people, made the nightmares a little quieter. Admiral Laura Beckett retired exactly 1 year after the war ended. She gave no farewell speech. She signed her papers, shook hands with her staff, and walked out of the mountain for the last time. On her way to the car, a young reporter stopped her and asked the question that everyone wanted answered. "Admiral, were you ever afraid?" Beckett stopped. She looked at the reporter, and then she looked up at the sky, blue and clear, and full of stars she could not see but knew were there. She smiled, just a little, the way a person smiles when they are remembering something painful and precious at the same time. Every single day, she said. That is the part they never understand about us. We are always afraid. We just don't let it stop us. She got in her car and drove away. The galaxy remembered. The aliens craved war until humans brutally paraded their king in public. Part 1. The Valkyrie had been fighting wars since before humans had learned to walk upright. Their entire civilization was built on one idea, and one idea alone. The strong take from the weak. That was how they saw the universe. Every star, every planet, every living thing was something to be conquered or something to be crushed. There was no middle ground. There was no room for mercy. Their children did not play games. They trained. Their priests did not pray for peace. They prayed for blood. Their poets did not write about love. They wrote about the glory of standing over a fallen enemy. At the center of it all sat King Drothal, the one they called the Unbroken. He had earned that name over 60 years of brutal conquest. 47 star systems had fallen under his rule. He wore the bones of defeated rulers around his neck like jewelry. His throne was carved from the hull of the very first warship he had ever destroyed, back when he was barely old enough to hold a blade. He had never lost a battle. He had never retreated. He had never shown mercy to anyone who stood against him, and the galaxy feared him for it. His war council was made up of the most ruthless commanders the Valkyrie had ever produced. Chief among them was General Vakar, a scarred veteran who had personally led the destruction of 3 civilizations. Vakar was loyal to Drothal not out of love, but out of respect for power. The day Drothal showed weakness would be the day Vakar put a blade in his back, and both of them knew it. It was Vakar who brought the report about Earth to the king. Valkyrie scouts had been mapping the outer edges of an unremarkable spiral arm when they stumbled across a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star. It leaked radio signals and television broadcasts and satellite chatter in every direction, like a child screaming in a quiet room. The species living on it called themselves humans. Vakar played some of the intercepted broadcasts for the War Council. The Valkyrie watched footage of human wars, human politics, human arguments, and human entertainment. They saw a species that could not even agree among themselves. Nations drew lines on maps and fought over patches of dirt. Leaders shouted at each other across tables while their people struggled below them. The humans had no unified government, no planetary defense network, and no fleet capable of operating beyond their own solar system. The War Council laughed. One of the junior commanders called the humans loud insects. Another said conquering them would be an insult to the Valkyrie military because there would be no challenge in it. Vakar silenced them with a look and turned to Drothal. They are weak, Vakar said, but they are numerous, and they breed fast. Better to take them now before they spread. Drothal agreed. He ordered a single transmission sent to Earth. The message was simple. Surrender unconditionally within 10 rotations of your planet, or face complete destruction. There will be no negotiation. There will be no second chance. The transmission hit Earth's deep space monitoring array on a Wednesday afternoon. Lieutenant Commander Danny Holt was on duty at the time, sitting in a basement facility in Colorado that most people did not even know existed. Danny was 29 years old, tired from a double shift, and drinking his 4th cup of coffee when his screen lit up with a signal unlike anything he had ever seen. It took him 2 hours to decode it. When he finished, he sat very still for a long time. Then he picked up the phone and called Admiral Laura Beckett. Beckett was 61 years old. She had gray hair, sharp eyes, and a voice that could freeze a room. She had spent her entire career in the United Earth Defense Coalition, an organization that most politicians treated as a joke. The coalition existed because someone had once written a treaty saying Earth should prepare for the possibility of extraterrestrial contact. That treaty had been signed by over 100 nations, and almost none of them had taken it seriously. Funding was always being cut. Equipment was always outdated. The best officers always transferred to other branches because the coalition was seen as a dead end. Beckett had stayed anyway. She had stayed because she believed deep in her gut that someday the call would come. And now it had. She read the decoded message twice. She set it down on her desk. She looked at Danny and said, "Well, they picked the wrong species." Within 6 hours, the message had been shared with every major government on Earth. Within 12 hours, something remarkable happened. The arguing stopped. The political games stopped. The petty disputes that had consumed nations for decades were set aside as if they had never mattered at all. The Global Defense Accord, that dusty old treaty, was activated for the first and only time in its history. Every signatory nation agreed to place its military forces under a single unified command. Admiral Laura Beckett was appointed Supreme Commander. She did not waste a single minute. Her first orders went out before the ink was dry on her appointment. Every deep space vessel was recalled to Earth. Orbital defense platforms that had been sitting in storage were launched and activated. Weapons factories that had been running at half capacity were pushed to full production, and then beyond. Civilian shipping lanes were cleared. Communication networks were hardened against interference. Earth began to transform from a bickering collection of nations into something the galaxy had never seen before. A species united by a single purpose. While all of this was happening, a young intelligence analyst named Kevin Marsh was sitting in a small office in Virginia, staring at the original Valkyrie transmission. Kevin was quiet, careful, and very good at noticing things other people missed. He had been studying the signal for hours when he found something buried beneath the main message. It was a subcarrier frequency, a hidden layer of data riding underneath the words of the ultimatum. When he decoded it, his stomach dropped. The Valkyrie had not just sent a threat, they had scanned Earth. The subcarrier was a passive sensor sweep of the entire planet, mapping military installations, population centers, energy output, and communications infrastructure. The aliens already knew where humanity's cities were. King Drothal sat on his throne of broken metal, surrounded by the bones of kings, and waited for another easy victory. He had no idea what was coming.